What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with a variant video for a vintage G.I. Joe. And I thought today we'd talk about the Cobra Tele-Viper. The Cobra Tele-Viper is one of the original figures, and he made a pretty big... he had a pretty big presence in the original cartoon that aired in the 1980s, and he was kind of the communications specialist for Cobra, and the original figure came out in 1985, and that's the one on your left here, the blue figure with the traditional Cobra blue color. And they also released, as part of the Python Patrol series in 1989, a repaint of that, and that's the one on your right. And it's the exact same mold, exact same figure. It just has a different color scheme. For those that don't know, the Python Patrol series basically were repaints for the most part of past figures that basically were all soldiers, you know, different troops, different specialized troop infantry types for Cobra. They just reissued them essentially in 1989 for those that may have missed them during the original run. So not much difference in them, but I've got 4 Python Patrol figures. This is one of them, and I got 3 behind it as well. I purchased all 4 of them in a lot. The seller locally just wanted to kind of get rid of them, and they're in varying conditions, but this one's probably, of the Python Patrol figures I have, this is probably my best one. And given that I do have both of these graded, I thought we'd just talk about the Tele-Viper briefly. The Tele-Viper was kind of a dork. He was a nerd. In the cartoon series, they had this shtick where when the Tele-Viper was trying to communicate to troops, or he was communicating to Cobra Commander, their leader, the words that he was thinking would kind of scroll across his visor, like, "Oh no, oh, here come the G.I. Joes," or exclamation point. It was just kind of silly, but anyway, he was kind of a comic relief almost during battles. But anyway, let's take a look at the original one first. This is the 1985 Hasbro Series 4 Tele-Vipers. It came back as a 80 near mint. For those of you who don't know, the original AFA grading only had kind of a total score. So it did not break it down by bubble, by figure, or blister, figure, and card. And so it just had like an overall score. So this one was an overall 80 near mint. And that brings up one point that I'll kind of touch on briefly, but when you see figures for sale on eBay or elsewhere, and they have this old style of grading, typically they do not resell for nearly as high as something that's been graded more recently that has the breakdown that you've seen in my other videos with the bubble, the figure, and the score. And this one does have the more recent grading. This is one I got graded, so we'll compare. I'll show you the difference. But anyway, this is the original vintage Tele-Viper, and I'll just kind of zoom in so you can take a closer look at him. You can see the silver visor. That's where I was talking about in the cartoon, where words would scroll across his visor, and you could see it on screen. It was kind of silly, but he's actually a pretty cool figure. He has kind of like a microscope-ish type of thing, or maybe a communications beam of some sort, along with a backpack and a hose. You can see the hose kind of wrapped up in there, but pretty nice design. He's got the colors that are typical for the Cobra troops. He's even got a Cobra logo on his belt buckle there. But and then here's the back of the card. You can see some of the other troops. Again, this was 1985, so right during the heyday of G.I. Joe's kind of popularity. Everything from Snake Eyes and Quick Kick down here to Barbecue. And then some of the more recent figures that were released. Storm Shadows I believe, also came out in 1984. But anyway, that's kind of his thing there. But here's his file card, and he's a radio telecommunications operator of the Cobra Ground Forces. They carry standard modular radio pack that contains a main unit, a VHF transceiver equipped with an automatic frequency hopper. Blah 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 blah. A bunch of nerd speak, but. Anyway, it gives you just kind of a nice kind of summary of what they do, but essentially he's the communications specialist for G.I. Joe. And, as part, like I mentioned, as part of the Python Patrol, you can see the logo up there for the kind of the reissues. They updated the colors with something a little bit more garish and kind of obnoxious looking. This came out in 1989, which was basically at the very, very end of G.I. Joe's popularity. I consider 1989 kind of the last year of really the popularity of G.I. Joes. There were some really cool figures in 1990, 1991 even, but 89 is kind of the last real year. But anyway, as I mentioned, I picked this one up as part of a lot of all these Python Patrol figures. And this one, I'll give you the grading here. It's a 1989 Hasbro Series 8 Python Patrol, Python Tele-Viper. It came back as an 80 plus. And you can see this one's got the actual breakdown of the card 80, a bubble 85, figure 85. So very nice high grade. I also always get the archival upgrade for the cases for these G.I. Joes, since they do have a rubber band that holds these together. And I don't know if it'll actually help the rubber band stay together or not. They'll probably dry rot anyway, and I'll have a pile of pieces inside a bubble. But hopefully not. But you can see the color difference. They have this obnoxious kind of scaly looking snake thing. Very imaginative, along with the red buckle and red visor and some yellow accents. So, but it's the exact same mold. There's absolutely no difference between these other than the colors. And, even the artwork is exactly the same, just with updated colors. And on the back of the card, you can see the 6 Python Patrol figures that were included as part of that kind of re-release. You have the Tele-Viper here. You got a Python Viper, which is very cool. I don't have him. The Python Copperhead, the Python Officer, the Crimson Guard, and the Trooper. And I have several of those back here, as you can tell. I've got the Crimson Guard on your far left, the Python Trooper, and the Python Copperhead. These two are 75s, and this was an 80 plus. So the Copperhead was actually never released as a carded figure. The original Copperhead was kind of a very, very bright green, neon green, and he was included as a pack-in for a vehicle called the Water Moccasin. That was one of the original vehicles. I believe it came out in either 1983 or 1984, but it was kind of like their swamp boat. So they re-released him for whatever reason. I don't really know why, but he's kind of like a swamp fighter and was a pack-in, but this is the first time they actually released him as a carded figure. But anyway, those are kind of like the subgroup that was kind of a re-release. They did the same thing for the G.I. Joes. It was called Tiger Force. As of now, I do not have any Tiger Force graded figures, but I've got a couple of the 25th anniversary figures that maybe we'll talk about one day once I get maybe a vintage figure that's graded. But this, it's kind of nice that they did re-release this. They Hasbro listened to fans back in the 80s, and a lot of these fans maybe got into it later, got into the G.I. Joe line later, and didn't pick up some of these early 80s, early series figures, and so they basically remolded them or recolored them and re-released them in 1989 towards the end of the run. I think basically also they knew that the G.I. Joe run was, the G.I. Joe figure line was nearing the end of its popularity, so it was kind of a refresh to try and clutch some last few remaining dollars from G.I. Joe fans before they kind of shut it down. But it sputtered along for another few years and got more and more ridiculous with the colors before they finally shut it down in the early 90s. But anyway, I just thought I'd show you this comparison. It's very cool. This Tele-Viper was one of the very first G.I. Joes I ever bought graded. And like I mentioned, if you ever see figures that have the old style grading, typically if it's in an auction format, you can expect to pay a lot less than something that's more recently graded. So anyway, I hope you found this interesting, and I will talk to you soon.